Hey everybody, Ed here with the Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a comparison between the Sony Alpha A6000 on the left and the A7 Mark II on the right. These are two very different cameras, even though they are both manufactured by Sony, of course, are mirrorless interchangeable lens cameras, and happen to be based around the E-mount. So even though they are both Alpha and E-mount, still very different. We've got an aps-c sensor in the A6000, incredible autofocus speed, 11 frames per second, and really, in my opinion, it is one of the best overall mirrorless interchangeable lens cameras on the market right now, especially now at its current price point. When you take a look at the A7 Mark II, Sony's latest addition to their full-frame mirrorless interchangeable lens E-mount lineup of bodies, you do have, again, native E-mount support, but you have the full-frame capability. So a much different I would say overall experience and aim with a full-frame sensor as opposed to aps-c. And if you don't know which is right for you, then I'm going to generally recommend the aps-c sensor because the customers that know they need full-frame or want full-frame generally know why. But moving right along, in terms of actual real-world quality, these cameras are very close, but when it comes to the characteristics of aps-c sensors, as opposed to larger full-frame sensors, of course, they are not. In terms of the glass, again, both cameras will support any E-mount native glass. However, the A7 Mark II is optimized for FE E-mount glass, which is full-frame like the lens you're looking at here. And the reason I have this example is because it really does draw a direct contrast and comparison between the format, the size, the form factor, that the aps-c Alpha lineup represents, as opposed to now the current generation of Alpha A7 full-frame mirrorless interchangeable lens cameras. So the A7 Mark II, much larger, much more expensive. You're looking at a $1,700 body. Now the A6000 can be found far below its original retail launch price. And in terms of megapixels, they're very close to one another, even though, again, the aps-c sensor is considerably smaller than the full frame. When it comes to video, though, no 4K in either of these. Of course, autofocus speed, I mentioned, in the A6000 is simply unbelievable. And the tracking is fantastic. Many will say it's hit or miss, but in the mirrorless world, it is really one of the best cameras that I've ever handled. The A7 Mark II doesn't have that advantage. It doesn't have speed in its favor, but beyond its full-frame sensor and incredible build quality, not to knock the A6000, you do have some major advantages. Primarily, the A7 Mark II is the first Sony E-mount mirrorless camera in general to have in-body image stabilization, and it's actually 5-axis. So working with native E-mount glass. And I'm not going to get into the complete breakdown of how it treats E-mount glass that has stabilization as opposed to glass that does not, because of course some lenses have it, some don't. Some Zeiss do not have optical steady shot, whereas like this one right here, the FE 24-70 does have optical steady shot, but of course there are other primes that do not. And that's always been the case with E-mount glass, since stabilization has never been in body, but now with the Mark II, we finally have that, and at the full frame level. And I'll talk about who I think Sony was really after with this camera. The A6000 is the camera for everyone, whether we're talking about the enthusiast, mom, dad, grandma, grandpa. This camera is really just a gem, especially when paired with the right glass. I mean, you see here, this is a pancake 20mm prime piece of glass, f2.8, of course, crop factor taken into account because remember, aps-c, not full frame. You do have a built-in flash, something you don't have on the much more expensive full frame A7 Mark II. And many people are going to think that this comparison is crazy. I should have done a disclosure at the beginning of this video, but realistically, people are going to look at these two products, especially when looking at image samples, and wonder whether or not the extra money is justified in the full frame offering. And I'll get to that as well later. But the A6000 really offers, in my opinion, Again, best-in-class autofocus speed. Image quality is great. Video quality is great. No 4K, but Sony's been doing a great job with 1080p for quite some time now. I would have liked to have seen more advanced video, but that'll be a complaint of the Mark II when I get to it shortly after this. NFC Wi-Fi, Sony's done a great job, pretty much pioneered, I would say, in the DI business, that application with their Play Memories app store and all the different types of apps that you can use in order to take your creativity as well as overall experience to another level beyond, again, anything else that it competes with. This pancake lens I love. Highly underrated in my opinion, much better than the original 16. It has the same lens hood as its FE counterpart, even though it's not really a counterpart, but the 35mm FE full frame E-mount lens designed for the Alpha, the A7 line of full frame cameras like the one over here. And it's just a great piece of glass. It makes this almost pocketable, and startup time on this camera, everything is just very fast, and that's something you want in something that's basically on the go for you all the time if you're traveling. And this again applies to any sort of customer. So just to give you an example of on-off time here, I'm going to go ahead and flip the switch. It's coming up with this prompt because I did just reset the camera. And autofocus speed. Am I in burst mode? I am not. I am. Let's go. And this thing will, fill the buffer up depending on what kind of card you're dealing with. That will affect performance. After all, the images are large, 24 megapixel sensor here, just like the 24, by the way, that you have in the A7 Mark II. In terms of the display, fully articulating, doesn't go all the way around for self-portrait, limited, of course, by the OLED viewfinder, which many felt was a step down from last gen, but I can say it's still very competent, a very nice viewfinder, and does perform well in bright light. It's not the best, it's not as solid as the A7 offerings, the entire family of full-frame mirrorless. In my opinion, the OLED viewfinder and its placement is far superior there, but this is more about clearly about portability. Now, when it comes to customization and menus, you have it all. I mean, really, Sony gives you everything quickly and efficiently, and that's one of the things I really like about them. They've gotten the software right for many years now. This used to be a big problem with them, but once they realized they needed to bring the pro-style menus to even offerings like this that don't come at pro pricing, they have really, I think, expanded their DI business in a way that years ago they couldn't have even imagined. Forget when they acquired Konica Minolta's property in the business. In terms of customizable buttons, you can see you have a host of them. Of course, traditional mode dial right here, as well as assignable customizable dial here right now set to exposure, as you can see, and aperture. And you can assign this to anything you want, and that's what's really cool about this camera at its price. It's got everything. The only thing it's missing really is 4K, and hopefully we're going to see a mirrorless offering like this that's also affordable with 4K. That's something Sony hasn't done yet. They've kind of been, in my opinion, holding back to a certain degree. By the way, right here is your terminal for your ports, HDMI as well as micro USB for charging. The HDMI port does give you clean output for those of you that are curious, and the multi-function USB port can be used for remote controls and other devices, and that's why it is dubbed a multi-port, as you can see right there. But it's just a great camera, a great B, C, or even D, depending on where it fits in your dynamic, or A, for those of you, again, that are just looking for digital SLR performance in something that looks like a point and shoot. And then the bonus here really is that E-mount glass is nowhere near as expensive as it was once upon a time. The shutter button placement here also actually foreshadowed the entire shift for the full frame line. And you can see that because it's been relocated to the exact same position on the A7 Mark II. Now let me talk to you about what this camera can do. We've got 5-axis image stabilization, a lot more weight, a much larger grip. This is a footprint that is basically twice the size at the very least of the A6000 that I've just been showing you. But when it comes to supporting full frame glass like you've got here, but more importantly, much larger lenses, much of the lineup that Sony announced at CES the other day, that's where this grip is going to be invaluable. In terms of the shutter button placement, as opposed to the original A7, A7R, and A7S, I think it is more natural here, but I have to say, for me personally, the grip wasn't as dreamlike an experience as many had built it up to be. When I first got it out of the box, I thought it was great, but after a while I found that I was still tending to balance with the lens, put most of the weight on the lens, despite the extra body weight that this revamped design brings to the table. I still found myself using the lens more often than not, and what that meant was that really this grip was just more cumbersome at the end of the day, rather than really alleviating stress and making for a more comfortable shooting experience for me personally. Now that may have to do with the size of my hands, although I don't think that's really what it's about. Maybe I'm just too accustomed to working with my A7R, but for whatever reason, believe it or not, I do actually prefer the ergonomics of the A7R, and I'll be one of the few people to say that, but I also prefer the fact that it's lighter, smaller, has higher res. Not getting into that. That's a video entirely about the A7 Mark II and what it represents in Sony's lineup. But for $1,700 or $2,000 with the kit glass, which is, I would say, a very good deal, you're getting a 24 megapixel full frame sensor, 5-axis image stabilization, of course, again, Wi-Fi and NFC, access to the same play memory applications that you have with the aps-c based A6000. You don't have that hybrid autofocus system that's going to achieve 11 frames per second, but you do have improved autofocus from the A7, its predecessor, as well as improved auto tracking on focus. So that's definitely noteworthy, and I have seen a significant improvement. Sony's put a number on it, but I can tell you real world it is significant. The biggest change, again, is that 5-axis image stabilization, and what that equates to is now something that we've never had before. Sony's always marketed the E-mount lineup of cameras from really in the inception of the NEX7 as being a gateway for photographers to bring any piece of glass they wanted to Sony's sensor and basically make it sing. And that's always been a great concept, but never necessarily well executed, at least from, I think, the pro perspective, and even from many amateurs and enthusiasts. The Mark II, though, with this addition of in-body stabilization, now gives everyone using an adapter and legacy glass from another manufacturer, or from anyone, I should really say, a reason to look at this camera and take it seriously, because they will have stabilization, they will gain effective stops, no matter what now. How well that actual stabilization will work all depends on the lens itself and how it actually communicates with the body. I'm not going to get into that specifically here, but really at the end of the day, this is Sony's dream, or I think original concept for the entire E-mount embodied right here in the Mark II, and that was to convince, realistically, photographers that not only could they make something that was smaller, but still just as effective as its full frame competition or brethren, but beyond being smaller, actually more flexible and, again, more valuable to a photographer that has a collection of glass and doesn't want to start over, which the E-mount always really represented, a complete brand new set of glass that everyone was going to have to invest in. It was very expensive early on, now definitely more value-oriented. Zeiss glass like this, though, is still very expensive. You're looking at a $1,200 lens, or might be $1,100 now, and all of the other FE glass that's come out, Zeiss especially, certainly still carrying a high price tag. No question about it. You are paying a premium for that Zeiss name, and many people complain about, the aperture f4 here, f4 on the 70 to 200 G glass that I love, but they have to remember that Sony is striking a compromise between size and performance, and the A7S really shows that off. But the Mark II, the 5-axis stabilization with Sony E-mount glass, you're going to get basically full control of that, and for both still and video, it does actually revolutionize DI, specifically full frame capability. The magnesium, the full metal body, basically another class. I mean, when you pick this up compared to the A7, A7R, or A7S, this thing is a beast, and it's not just the extra grip, it's the entire body itself. Same concept in terms of design, hot shoe at the top. By the way, I never mentioned the hot shoe on the A6000, but that's because I really don't think that the majority of A6000 buyers are going to be after using the hot shoe, but I could be completely wrong. But it will give you the ability to add a flash, a microphone, a whole host of different flexible options that really, again, you wouldn't expect in a camera this size. But of course, you have that here. The OLED viewfinder, superior, no question about it. Love that it's center mounted. That's a matter, again, of personal preference. Articulating display is actually slimmer than on the A7, the entire original A7 lineup. So that's part of the redesign, making things a little bit thinner and upping the resolution at that. They went beyond the 900K display that they use on the A6000 and pretty much every other Alpha interchangeable lens camera. They've also changed the ports. You can see right here, they actually changed the design of the doors, which I showed a little bit in a comparison to the A7R, which, again, this is part of the redesign and really just trying to listen to customer feedback and accommodate everyone. So you have a line in, you can monitor, of course, audio out, and HDMI out. That is a clean output, along with their multi, which is really just a micro USB port for charging your battery on board, as well as using optional accessories. Battery life on these is close, 250 to 300 shots roughly on stills. Of course, the stills here are much larger because of the full frame sensor. The raw image is inevitably much bigger than the raw image you're getting out of the aps-c A6000. In terms of button layout, a lot more customization here, and there should be. This is a far more expensive camera aimed at a different market, as I mentioned before, one that's in a different budget, and usually that budget equates to different use. Again, whether it's professional, enthusiast, it's just not the same customer base. But there is an overlap here because, again, when it comes down to it, these are still some of the most powerful, lightweight DI tools in the world, and they really are competent. And because of the adapter capability and being able to throw all that glass on, no one else really has that claim to fame still. Sony's been doing it longer than anybody, and when it comes to sensors themselves, that's another thing that they are experts. Both of these cameras, by the way, are driven by the same processor, the Bionz X, which is a great chip. It drives 4K as well. I would have liked to have seen 4K with these cameras, but again, that is a shortcoming of this model in particular. They did rearrange some of the buttons here, the custom buttons, the function buttons. Power on time is, pretty fast. It is improved from the original A7, but again, autofocus isn't really a big pickup. It's the autofocus tracking that's improved, I would say, in real-world use. And in terms of shutter sound, let me go ahead and give you that taste, because I know there are some of you that are going to, as I drop that, want to hear that. So here we go. Let me give you continuous. There you go. And of course, I mean, it's a matter of what you're really after. Is speed more important, or is it all about the actual characteristics of full frame imaging and wanting that 35 millimeter equivalency and being able to utilize the full frame glass you already have. Now, to me, if you already own an A7, the Mark II isn't a worthwhile upgrade unless you have a collection of glass that you've been waiting for stabilization for. Then it is a complete instant buy. But otherwise, when it comes to the actual image quality, even though I haven't even mentioned video, yeah, we got a bump up. We got XAVCS. We have a higher bit rate, but to me, it's not really an upgrade considering they could push this firmware to every one of their cameras that has a Bionz X processor. So that's not really the big deal in my opinion, even though the video does look good. Don't get me wrong for a moment, video quality here is solid. Definitely better than the A7, but it's marginal. And until I see 4K, I'm not going to tell you that video is a reason to buy this camera, even with all the extra stabilization. In fact, the stabilization is really, in my opinion, far more beneficial to the still side of things than to the video side of things. And when it comes to software, again, you're looking at the same ecosystem, even though this is a newer product, basically all the same. And I'm not going to run you through the menus. In terms of customizable buttons, dedicated exposure compensation dial right here, your mode dial, and then you've got both on the front and back, of course, customizable dials as well. The menu button relocated. This is a pretty strong deviation from where it's been in the past, and basically that's because they did really change the design of this camera on a lot of levels. And that's why I sort of have mixed feelings about it. I think it's a very good beginning or starting point for the second generation of A7s, but this one is not personally for me. Now, if you're brand new to Sony and it's your first mirrorless camera from them, then this is probably a great option in my opinion, especially again if you have a collection of legacy glass. But on the other hand, if you're already in the Sony system, I would wait, no question about it. The A6000, when it comes to pure image quality, does a great job. So you're not going to go wrong with this camera under any circumstance whatsoever. It does a great job at just about everything. So at the end of the day, it comes down to budget and, again, characteristics. No weather sealing here. You have it here on the right with the A7 Mark II. Both are great cameras, very big price difference. But in my opinion, you really can't go wrong with either one. So again, it comes down to what your budget is, how much you're going to end up spending on glass as well. If you get the A6000 with the kit lens, you're not going to have any problems. However, the A7 Mark II, even with a kit lens, already $2,000. If you, which by the way is a great lens. I've done a review on that. Check it out if you're curious. In the same vein, if you're looking to buy FE native glass for this camera, you're going to have to really start breaking out quite a budget. But both are great cameras designed for different customers, but in my opinion, they do overlap. I think they make great travel companions, by the way. I think this is a great A and B right here to take with you just about anywhere. Again, that depends on what your needs are, budget, and all the rest of that stuff. Any questions or comments, please feel free to post them. And of course, as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.